Hey, good morning, everybody. It is day 53 of Spiritual Healthcare. Welcome. I hope you guys are doing awesome today. This is going to be an interesting morning, and I'm excited to get into it because I was actually inspired by a book that I'm reading right now, and I'm so looking forward to talking about all of this with you because we're going to delve into some really deep concepts today, stuff that I see with my clients all the time, but it translates into so much in terms of our world and how we're moving forward and all of that. Good morning, Marge and Will and Patricia and Bernie. Nice to see you. It is so good to see you guys. Welcome, everybody. It's so awesome. I can't wait to talk about this with you guys today because this is such a deep and interesting topic, and you guys are either going to, like run like crazy, or you're gonna find it really interesting. There's no middle ground with this one. This is really good. It's probably the scariest thing that we've talked about actually over the last little while. Good morning, Jay. How are you? It's nice to see everyone. We're gonna be chatting today about the research work of an incredible woman who I think is just fantastic, and many of you guys have probably read her book, either The Gifts of Imperfection or Daring Greatly, among so many others. Dare to Lead. There's tons of books that she has out right now. Her name is Brene Brown, and her research is so valid in terms of how it relates to the paranormal, how it relates to who we are going forward, throughout this pandemic, all sorts of things. So Marge says nothing scares her more than her ex. Yeah, fair enough. I see you. Bad behavior, I'm telling you. Yeah, I get it. It's funny too, because people often say, what's the scariest thing you've ever seen? And it's not paranormal. It's not paranormal at all. Yeah, I can think of a lot of freaky things, and most of them have nothing to do with supernatural occurrences. Good morning, Des. Good morning, everybody. It is so good to see all of you. As today's topic is a big one. It's a good one. I hope we can get it all in this morning. We'll have to see. But yeah, people do. They ask me all the time. They're like, what's the scariest thing you've ever seen? That's like the number one question that I get from everybody. And usually it has nothing to do with the supernatural at all. It's like, you want to know what the scariest thing I've ever seen is? Let me tell you, and do you have an hour? So anyway, lots of stories there. We won't go there. That is another topic for another day. I hope you guys had a great evening yesterday. I did also. I just, spent time with my little python, Galen. He learned about how to take a shower by himself yesterday. It was very cute. It was very, very cute. It was like the first time he'd ever wanted to really get in the bathtub and turn the shower on. So he spent like a while in there just enjoying the water. It was really funny. So that's his new thing, I guess, is going in. He gets in the bathtub all by himself now, and he has a shower. So there you go. Anyway, so what are we talking about today? We're talking about shame. We're talking about vulnerability. So who is Brene Brown? Who is this person we're going to be chatting about? Brene Brown was actually a professor at, she did her studies at University of Houston, and she's had an amazing life, amazing experiences. And what's so great about her work that I love so much is that she is able to share her work and share her experiences on a level that is compelling. It's and it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable. She walks the walk, and not easily either. Linda is saying she just finished listening to Emily's new podcast. It was long, but it was a great show. Yeah, her shows are. I'm telling you, Emily Stakely, man, she's got it. It's such a great show. I'm going to be doing a lot more with her coming up in the near future, which is super cool. Also, so let's chat about this because Brene Brown, as I say, she's a research professor. Her TED Talks went viral, which she did not expect. Her first TED Talk was on her research on vulnerability. And what I find so interesting about this is that many families, a belief in non-physical, a belief in the paranormal, a belief in magical things or supernatural things happening to them, or some people that on the outside view it as magical, that equals almost instantaneously in a lot of families shame. Instantaneously. The paranormal equals shame. Psi experiences, near-death experiences, all of that kind of thing, oftentimes for people equal shame. And usually it's because we set up a society very early on that dictated that if you believed in this stuff, if you believed in, all of these possibilities that could be happening, that automatically people believed that you were crazy, you were made to feel crazy, you were demeaned for it, and the establishments really pushed the idea that if they could not measure it, then it didn't exist. That was just the rule. If they couldn't measure it, it didn't exist. It didn't spawn the idea for them that there is it didn't spawn the idea that that is a launching point and a catalyst for asking questions. It was just, if we don't understand it and we don't see it, then bam, it doesn't exist. And if you believe it, you're crazy. So there's a lot that went on, especially as the scientific movement and things like that were starting to develop. When they still didn't have an understanding of this, of these concepts, where it was just the way to frame these things, where they would turn around and just, it was just, you were shamed for it. So that's become, a stigma over the last number of years. And here's the problem with all of that. And I've been reading lately, a really interesting book actually by, a fellow by the name of Jerome Loving on Walt Whitman. And Walt Whitman and Ralph Waldo Emerson grew up and established their careers in a very interesting time, because by the mid-1800s or so, they delved into a number of concepts that just weren't discussed. They weren't talked about. Things like transcendentalism, transcendental meditation, all of that kind of thing. And branching outside of things like organized religion. And as I'm reading through this book, and for those of you guys who don't know transcendentalism, it's the strong belief in equality, individualism, self-reliance, integrity, optimism. However, they also believed that the most important reality is what is sensed around them is strictly intuitive. So this was very much going against a number of different factors, right? It's going against things like, the organized religion, where it's like, if you don't do what I say, then you're going to hell, and things like that. As well as the idea that science was the end all and the be all, and that they knew everything already. So it was a very strong position to take, and how they maneuvered through that. And as I've been reading this book about Walt Whitman and his journey and his discovery of himself and all of these things, what I've begun to realize is that no matter what position you take on it, this book is really about reading about vulnerability. That's really what it is. It doesn't matter whether you agree with them, don't agree with them. It really doesn't matter. But it's about vulnerability. And as we start to look at our world around us, we have to understand that vulnerability is the birthplace of joy. And most people don't see vulnerability as something that is a strength at all. They see it as a weakness. I know probably a lot of people can put their hands up with this one, where they see vulnerability as a weakness. And that's a real problem. So, in the most ideal world, in a healthy world, we should be able to surrender and walk into it. But people usually don't want to do that. We like to numb everything. And what's interesting is that when we look at the concept of we have to measure it in order to experience it, to create, the very essence of creating is to make something that never existed before, right? We have to have that level of faith that this something like this can be created. So this is a really interesting subject for me, because the less people really want to talk about it, the more you end up with it. Shame and vulnerability are tied in together. They're tied in together. And oftentimes, as Brene Brown stated so brilliantly, that shame is usually underpinned with a fear of vulnerability, because shame prevents us from being seen. It prevents us from being seen for who we are. And a lot of, it's funny because so many of my clients, the one thing, when they look for help or they want an investigator to come in and look for them, they do not mean to tell their neighbors. They don't want to, expose it. They want to keep it quiet. And sometimes it's within their own family members, and they just say, look, we can't discuss this within the family, because if we start to expose this and build this up, then people are going to turn around and start getting, and they're going to come down on us. They're going to reject us. And the number one fear everybody has is rejection. So people who have not really had the same struggle with things like vulnerability, interestingly enough, have a strong sense of love and belonging. And what Brene Brown found that I think is so interesting, which ties into the blue zones that we talked about prior, is that they believe that they belong where they are. They believe in the love and belonging. They believe that they deserve these various things. And anybody who puts their hand up and says that they have not felt shame, then you are probably either a psychopath or a sociopath, and that's and it's true. It really is true. We've all carried it at some point in our experience. And the people who have done the best with this and done the best to move forward with it, whether they're dealing with, a family who don't believe in the paranormal, or a family who is, maybe putting them down for the fact that maybe they're gay, maybe you've got something going on where, you don't feel like you can come out and explain it. Some people it's really dark. Sometimes it's sexual assault or, whatever it is. And sometimes it's just a shame of feeling like you are a mistake. Which of course is there's so much flaw in that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But the people who have done well with this, what Brene Brown found was very interesting. They all had the courage to be imperfect. And I thought that was really, really important. They had the courage to be imperfect. They had compassion for themselves. They had really big compassion for themselves, and therefore they had compassion for others. Because as we know, if we fill up our cup, we fill up our heart, then, we can give in a more genuine way. And they had a connection with others. But here's the catch. It was a result of authenticity. It was a result of authenticity. These are the people who have done well moving through vulnerability and moving through the idea of shame. And they embraced, and here's the big kicker, they embraced the idea of being vulnerable. They walked into it. They opened it. They just opened their hearts to it. And all of this wraps up to courage. And what's interesting about this is the fact that the people who I have found have done the best with the Teaching the Living program have been the ones who are willing to be the most vulnerable, and in a number of different ways. Not only looking at themselves, not only looking at their current circumstances and their current situation, but being able to take a bead on where they sit and not only ask for help, accept the help, and put down the preconceived notion of what their world looks like. And that takes courage. That takes a serious amount of courage. For researchers, this has always been what's fascinated me. In paranormal research, this idea of vulnerability goes against what the scientific establishment often is requiring of us, and the academic establishment is requiring of us. And Brene Brown mentioned this in one of her TED Talks, where she said it really is about all of these experiments and qualifications and qualitative research and whatnot is about the ability to being able to control and predict results. And this goes against all of academia, really, because things like vulnerability, things like connection, that's not a predictable result. None of that is predictable. The paranormal and the non-physical and all of the things that we research as psi investigators, it's not predictable. And I think this is where we see the disconnect between what we consider, academia and things like occupations like physicians and things like that versus like parapsychology and whatnot, and often why parapsychology gets mislabeled as something like a fringe science. Because what happens is that when we can't put our finger on it and say, no, this happens. We can make this happen every single time. We can control the outcome. We can get our fingers into it and make something happen. And paranormal doesn't work that way. And the funny thing is that people don't work that way either. It doesn't work like that. And in order to understand the flow and ebb of psi research and the paranormal and all of this, we have to be able to understand vulnerability. We just have to. We can't experience a connection with what it is that is non-physical without understanding things like shame, without understanding things like vulnerability, and being able to surrender and tune into what it is that we have been given over the years. You know, and it's just so fascinating. I ended up writing just an absolute ton of notes on this. I really did, because there's so much to cover. The one issue that Brene Brown brought up that I thought was so impactful, and that I think it needs to be said repeatedly, is that shame is not guilt. And so many people who are dealing with the paranormal and dealing with haunted homes and all of these things, or dealing with the ability to, you know, connect in with non-physical, people who have had mediumship experiences or near-death experiences, oftentimes they struggle between what is shame and what is guilt. And guilt is very different than shame. And I loved Brene Brown's explanation of this, which is shame is, I'm bad. Guilt is, I did something bad. Okay, so there's a big difference. Shame is internalized. And when shame gets internalized, you're beginning to look at yourself as you are the mistake, not you made a mistake. And you're starting to ask for forgiveness for something that you are. And we see this oftentimes when it comes to people who delve into paranormal research, you know, because of an experience that they've had, trying to understand what's going on, and continuously getting rejected for it. In Brazil right now, in South America, they've actually come out with a number of programs for counseling for people who've had these experiences, because what's been happening is that these individuals will have these unique encounters, and sometimes they're amazing encounters. Sometimes they're, you know, a loved one will pass away or something like that, and they will have the most amazing encounter with somebody who's passed on, or they'll have a, you know, see an apparition or get a wonderful message, and then they're excited, so they go and tell their therapist, or they go and tell their doctor, or they go and tell, you know, a family member or whatnot, and the medical establishment will turn around and say, oh, you need help. You must need help, because that's not healthy coping. You shouldn't have had that experience. That's not healthy. We're going to help you be healthy so that you can tune out of that and you know, and deal with this in the acceptable way that we can relate to, because the way you're dealing with it scares us. And because it scares us, we have to make you wrong. And it's something that people have dealt with a long time. And years ago, you know, they would even go as far as to throw people, you know, into you know, psychiatric facilities and hospitals and all sorts of things, thinking that they were delusional because it didn't fit the framework of what it is that they thought you should be experiencing. And this is what I mean when I say that when we start to put this in a box of you know, how people should be experiencing and controlling and manipulating those variables so that they have to look a certain way, then we lose the point. We lose the point of what that connection is supposed to look like. And we rip that person's ability to be vulnerable to pieces. We just do. You know, that degrading, that being able to come in and say, you know, no, you should not experience it this way. You need to experience it this way because it makes me comfortable. And we tear people's vulnerability down, you know, when it comes to this. Secrecy, silence, judgment. This is the guise in which shame is so prevalent. And we, you know, it's funny because Dr. Phil had said something, and he said something repeatedly that has always caught me, which is we are as sick as our secrets. And I think this is so incredibly true. And what's so interesting is that so many people who I've conducted, I've done hundreds and hundreds of classes with, workshops and people from all over the world, that have flown in to, come to my classes and workshops and walk in classrooms and all of that kind of thing. And it's so interesting because every once in a while, you'll get the people who go, oh, I'm here for my wife, or I'm here for, my brother or my partner or whatever. They wanted to come, so I'm coming with them. And, I don't believe in any of this stuff. It's usually what they say. I don't believe in it, but, I'm here for them. And I always take note of those people, because usually where the disbelief comes from, where that disconnection comes from, interestingly enough, usually comes from an inability to be vulnerable. Not an inability to believe, but an inability to be vulnerable. And it's so intriguing that as they go along and that they realize that the space that we've created as a group is open and accepting, and people are discussing their experiences, more often than not, it's those people at the end that want to tell their story. Most people. And I can tell you the majority of people fall into that category, who come in saying, I don't believe in this. Usually it's because they've had an experience and they've been shamed for it. They've been told they've been wrong. They've been told they are wrong. And they've been told that because they've experienced it, they are wrong. And the way to break this down, and what I have found to be so true, and the conclusions that Brene Brown has also introduced into her research, has been that empathy kills it. Empathy kills it. Bam. Just it instantly. It's easy to stand on the outside of things. It really is. And to be able to point a finger, because it's easier, even if we've experienced it. And sometimes we see this with people who are, they're struggling with an internal secret, somebody who hasn't come out to their family, something like that, who, will stand back and point the finger at another who has had the same thing happen and demonize that person for something that they've experienced, or they're saying their experience. And often our harshest critics are from the people who are standing outside of that arena. We read a quote from Theodore Roosevelt the other day, and it had to do with the idea that you can't criticize somebody unless you're standing in the arena with them. And that indeed is daring greatly. And I think this is absolutely so important and so key to recognize that not only can you not criticize them, that the reason that you are likely making that criticism without being in their shoes, without being in there, without, doing the research, or, going on the adventure, or whatever it is, the reason you're criticizing is often because those people cannot deal with the fact that they either feel a disconnection, that they can't do it, or they're going through it themselves and they don't know how to handle it. So we have to take those critics very carefully, because so much of the time that criticism is a way for them to deal with their own shame. And vulnerability is the ability to stand there and do it anyway, to walk in to whatever it is that you are fearing, that you are, maybe it's a goal that you want to accomplish. Maybe it's a book you want to write, or a speaking engagement you want to do, or, maybe it's just having a really hard conversation with your parents over something. Whatever that is, whatever that looks like, standing on the outside of things and looking inwards will not get you where you want to go. The only way, you can talk about it till you're blue in the face. You really can. Because a lot of people do that. They will sit on the outside and they will talk their mouth off about it for years. They'll criticize the people that are doing it, and they will talk about how they're going to get in there and just make it happen. They're going to get in there and just make it happen. They never do. None of them ever do. They will sit on the sidelines until they're 95, and they don't do it. And ultimately, it comes back to the same thing, which is fear of vulnerability. So, that being said, whatever you guys are dealing with today, the process that I want to challenge you with is for you to be able to challenge yourself to find the courage to be vulnerable within your experience. What can you do? What can you do? Where have you shut that down? Take a look at it. Where have you shut down the capacity to take a really hard look at who you are, where your shame is, and begin to challenge that. Begin to challenge that, first by having empathy for who you are. Second, by realizing that whatever it is that you want to be doing, whatever it is, whether it be, as I say, writing a book or whatever, to be able to turn around and go, I am not going to be at a point where I am going to be comfortable in the new arena, because the arena is not comfortable. It's not comfortable. Whether it be the paranormal experience that you're having, whether it be investigating a new area of psi research, whether it be, exposing yourself to maybe people who have been critical to you in the past, but you're over that and you want to have those discussions. Whatever that is, it will not get to the point where you are going to walk into that arena and be happy about it. But that's okay. It doesn't matter. That's vulnerability. It's the willingness to be able to breathe through that moment. Breathe through that moment and do it anyway. And it is the beginning. It is the beginning to start opening up with this and really realizing that vulnerability and paranormal and the non-physical and surrender and all of those things are all mashed in and lumped into one. It really is. The people who have had, interestingly, here's a tidbit of information for you. The people who have had experiences with non-physical, especially the people who have had experiences with their loved ones, interestingly enough, are usually doing something very mundane. They've let go of the expectation of waiting for somebody to show up to make them feel better. They've let go of the waiting and the wanting and the white knuckling. And they've decided instead to let themselves be vulnerable enough to that experience and let it go. And that is usually where that deeper connection with non-physical and those loved ones and all of that, that's where it is. That's where it is. It begins in vulnerability. And that's one of the reasons why the paranormal challenges those notions so deeply, because it requires of us to trust in non-physical. It requires of us to be vulnerable, and it requires of us to put down our thinking mind and be able to go a little bit deeper than that, and put down the willingness to control the circumstances, how it happens, why it happens, when it happens. We can't do any of that. It's all about vulnerability. So the reading that I want to do for you guys today comes from Miss Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly, which is one, I think, to me, is one of her best. To me, it's one of her best. And I thought this piece in here was really great. So check this out. Over the course of 1 year, I interviewed artists, writers, innovators, business leaders, clergy, and community leaders about these issues and how they stayed open to the constructive criticism while filtering out the mean-spirited attacks. Basically because I wanted to know how they maintained the courage to keep on walking into the arena. I'll confess that I was motivated by my own struggle to learn how to keep daring. When we stop caring about what people think, we lose our capacity for connection. When we become defined by what people think, we lose our willingness to be vulnerable. If we miss all the criticism, we lose out on important feedback. But if we subject ourselves to the hatefulness, our spirits get crushed. It's a tightrope. Shame resilience is the balance bar, and the safety net below is 1 or 2 people in our lives who can help us reality check the criticism and the cynicism. And it is absolutely super true. Super true. Pay attention. We've talked so much about that. Pay attention. Who's in your experience? Who is in your experience and what are their motivations? Gather your data. Gather your data. So what I'm going to do today for you guys, for your to-dos, is I'm actually going to post to the EntitySeeker Facebook page Brene Brown's TED Talk on vulnerability, because and shame, because it is absolutely brilliant. And if you guys have that 18 minutes, please watch it, because I think you guys are going to get so much out of it. So much out of it. She's a brilliant speaker, and she's been on one of my favorite programs, Oprah's Life Class, numerous times. She's done workshops on vulnerability, and she's absolutely amazing. So I'm going to post her TED Talk so you guys can find her if you aren't familiar with her. And you can check that out today. As I say, there's so much to say on this subject matter. We could go on forever, but I hope this is at least a branch into what this looks like. And we're going to, in the spiritual healthcare masterclass that I'm going to be having out in the next number of months, we're going to do a deep dive into this type of a subject matter, because there is so much there and so much that needs to be understood. So that being said, you guys, got to do our health affirmations before we let you into the day. Everybody take a breath. It is natural for my body to be well. Even if I don't know what to do in order to get better, my body does. I have trillions of cells with individual consciousness, and they know how to achieve their individual balance. When this condition began, I didn't know what I know now, and I don't need to understand the cause of this illness. I'd only have to gently, eventually release this illness. It doesn't matter how it got started, because it's reversing its course right now. And there's no hurry about any of this. My body knows what to do. Well-being is natural to me. My inner being is intricately aware of my physical body. My cells are asking for what they need in order to thrive, and Source is answering those requests. I'm in very good hands. My only work is to relax and breathe. And I can do that easily. Everybody take a breath. And thank you to Abraham Hicks for all of those amazing affirmations. You guys, thank you again so much. We're going to be delving into even more tomorrow on spiritual healthcare, of course, every day during this crazy quarantine. And I am so looking forward to setting out the spiritual healthcare masterclass. The content is coming along so well, and I'm so excited to be able to send this to you guys, and that you guys can be able to sign up for this. It's going to be really, really cool. So stay tuned. Have an amazing afternoon. If it's nice out, open your windows, get some fresh air, and I will see you guys tomorrow morning in spiritual healthcare. Bye, everybody.